So we need to finish up where we left off in infection control first, which I know the last time I went on to look, I realized that a lot of us are slow to get the quizzes done, which is what happens at this time. It's not that I don't expect it. I just want to stress to keep going. So even if you only do one a week, even if that's all you have time for, because I know that life gets in the way, just keep moving at it. So from now on, the class is going to move probably a lot faster than you're able to move if you're not focusing on this entirely. It's because we're all juggling different things. So I get that. So we'll do a check-in at the end about where we're supposed to be, but we will finish up infection control right now with chapter 8. So let me just do this. I need to get rid of the self-view. Nope, that's not what I wanted to do. There we go. Okay. So, instrument processing, the last piece of our puzzle. So, what we did in last class is we talked about the regulations that we have to follow as dental assistants that pertain to infection control. Those are the bloodborne pathogen standard and the hazardous, the HCS, the hazard control standard. So, we looked at how we decide where to throw things away in the dental office, which is a big part of cleaning up. So what happens as a dental assistant is that you are probably most nervous when you're sitting chairside when you first begin. And chairside is what we're going to begin to talk about later tonight. But so you're most nervous chairside, but the time that you are probably the most under pressure to perform everything correctly without anybody watching you is during infection control. So the minute that the patient leaves the operatory, it's now on the dental assistant to make sure that we clean everything up correctly, that we do it safely so that we don't hurt ourselves, and that we don't spread disease in the dental office. So those are the things that we talked about last time. Just as a reminder, when it comes to surfaces, surfaces either get a barrier, which means they get either the blue sticky tape or a plastic covering, or they are cleaned and disinfected. And one of the things I like to use to illustrate this is if you put ketchup on a table and you went to wipe it, the first wipe might get rid of the ketchup, but it's not going to get rid of that smear that's left behind. And ketchup's a good example because it's thick and it's colored. So saliva is clear, and we can't always see that. So we have to remember that when we are cleaning our surfaces, we've got to wipe once, throw the wipe away, get a new wipe, wipe again, let it sit for the recommended time that the bottle says, because every office is going to use a different type of disinfectant. And then once that time has passed, we can be sure that all those microbes that we're trying to kill are dead. And remember that disinfection doesn't kill everybody. It leaves alive some spores. And then, so now we have to figure out how do we process the instruments that we use on the patient. So, instrument processing. Instrument processing should be completed in a dedicated part of the office. And you should have all the things you need to do. And those are air lines, vacuum lines, a deep sink that's hands-free, so you don't have to touch the controls, and of course trash. Instrument processing is a 7-step process. Now, you will not, when you perform instrument processing, be counting those 7 steps, but they will all flow together. Oh, I love it when people don't mute on the other end. I'm sorry for the background noise. When you are processing instruments, it should be in a loop, which means that you are going to go from dirty to clean to sterile to storage. And you should never go backwards. So if I have a dirty instrument and I bring it to the clean side, I should not be going backwards to the dirty side with it, unless I plan to start over. So single loop, no U-turn. It's a one-way street, dirty to clean to sterile to storage, which means when you enter the place where instrument processing happens, you are going to move down the line without going back on yourself. So that's the one-way street. So instrument processing starts at the chair side as soon as the patient leaves, ends with a quality assurance measure, meaning how well is my process working, and it takes place in the Steri Center or the central sterile. So what are the 7 steps? We're going to go through each one of them. I'm not going to tick them off here one by one, but you can come back to this slide as an overview. So the first step is transport. And transport means we are taking the instruments from the chair side to the central sterile. You need to have all your PPE on, including the heavy Moon utility gloves, so the big like dishpan gloves. At the chair side, with those big awful gloves on, you should be getting rid of sharps in the sharps container. So needles, scalpels, disposable sharps, anything that's sharp that is single use goes into the sharps container at chair side, because you don't want to be walking across the office with a sharp, because it is possible that you could trip and end up with a face full, right? Trust me, people have done it. And then at chair side, you can get rid of any waste into the proper containers, which is usually just the regular trash. So your gauze, your cotton rolls, your suction tips, anything else that you used during the treatment that is single-use disposable goes into the trash. And then you bring your instruments in a contaminated, leak-proof container that has a cover. So that if you trip, the only thing happening is you're dropping a container. You are not putting yourself at risk with a tray full of instruments that you could get in the face if you fall. Step 2 is cleaning. The cleaning part may not always be able to happen the minute you bring those instruments into the central sterile, meaning you may not have enough time to get them to the clean step. So if you can't clean them right away, you are going to put them in a holding solution. A holding solution you should think of like soaking your dishes in the sink before you wash them. All right, so like if you were to eat breakfast and you had an egg and you couldn't clean that plate, if you leave it out, you know that getting the egg off the plate is going to be miserable, right? Or at least I hope you've done a dish. But so if you soak that plate that's covered in egg, it's going to come off much easier afterwards. So this is the holding solution theory, is that we are soaking our dishes so that the stuff doesn't dry on them. Of course, we're not soaking dishes in dentistry, we're soaking instruments, right? So we're going to soak our instruments only if we don't have time to get to them right away, and only to keep them from drying out. But if I have time, I am going to place them into one of 3 things. Either I'm going to put them in an ultrasonic, which is the most common way to do it in the dental office, or I'm going to put them into a dental dishwasher, which is the automated washer or disinfector, or I can hand scrub them. Hand scrubbing is not recommended because you can get hurt. All right, so this is where we're at. We have just missed our patient, transported our instruments, disposed of our sharps and our trash, and we're still in full PPE with our utility gloves, and we've put our instruments into one of 3 types of cleaning, either ultrasonic, automated dishwasher, or hand scrub. So, as I said with the holding solution, like doing dishes, our 3 methods of instrument cleaning. So ultrasonic cleaners. Ultrasonic cleaners are not disinfectors. They're basically really big jewelry cleaners, if you've ever seen one. So they use vibration to create bubbles in a solution, and the bubbles pop the debris off of the instrument. So it sounds like, I don't know, there's a high-pitched whine that goes with the ultrasonic cleaner, and you probably heard it in the dental office. It is how we remove debris from the instruments. You should never reach in to an ultrasonic cleaner because you could get stuck with an instrument. So you're always going to be, they have baskets inside them. You're always going to be lifting the basket out and dumping the instruments onto a surface. They stay in the ultrasonic cleaner for 5 to 15 minutes, longer if they're in a cassette. So cassettes, remember we got a little taste of last week. Cassettes are the metal cages that keep our instruments safe and keep them from bouncing against each other, and also keep them in a setup. So ultrasonic cleaners, we can test them with aluminum foil to make sure they're working right. So when you put a piece of aluminum foil into an ultrasonic cleaner, it should have even bubbles all over it, meaning that the ultrasonic is generating the proper bubbles inside of it. And they always operate covered, and they need a biohazard and a secondary container label. So they have to be labeled as things that contain human blood and saliva. So here is a close-up of that ultrasonic cleaner, and there it is. Okay, close-up of the ultrasonic with with the cassettes and the wraps, and you can see what they look like up close, properly labeled with the biohazard symbol. Here's a nice cassette. They have started making them out of plastic as well. So. All right. And the solution is changed once a day in an ultrasonic cleaner. So usually it's drained at the end of the night, disinfected, and then filled again the next day. In a very busy office, you may end up having to change it twice a day. So if it's cloudy, it should be changed. And there's just an undermount. So they've, just like in modern kitchens, this is kind of the dental assisting kitchen. They've designed things to work well for what we do. Notice the utility gloves on the hands of the dental assistant. Notice how she's not exposed to the sharps at all. This is the instrument washer. It's basically a dishwasher. I think something that's fairly familiar. Remember that instrument washers have to be FDA approved for use in a dental office. So can't just be a dishwasher, but it's a special dishwasher. Manual cleaning is a great way to stick yourself with something sharp. So we don't recommend hand scrubbing, but if you hand scrub, you need to keep your instruments above the water line and make sure that you're just doing a couple at a time. Okay. So once the instruments have been cleaned, we like to do some things to make sure they won't rust during the next parts of the process. So there are rust inhibitors, there are lubrication for hinged instruments to keep them working well, and so all of those things are just allowed for keeping your instruments nice and keeping them clean longer. Rust is never sterile. Third step, packaging. All right, so far we've got transport, cleaning, and now we're on packaging. Packaging is what keeps them together, but mostly what keeps them from becoming contaminated after they're sterilized. Only FDA-approved packages are okay for wrapping in a dental office, and packages have to allow whatever the sterilizing agent is into the package. And we also have to have some monitors visible on our packages so that we can tell visually which ones have been sterilized and which ones have not been sterilized. So here you see that the packages, these are probably the most common. These are the paper plastic peel pouches. Say that 5 times fast. They're called that because one side is paper because it allows the sterilizing agent to get into the package. And the other side is plastic, which keeps the instrument visible to you, because you can't see through paper. And so this is what instruments will look like when they are properly packaged. Notice that hinged instruments need to be open when they're sterilized, so that any junk that's inside there gets the sterilizing agent. Cassettes are wrapped in paper that we can't see through. So the outside is typically labeled with what type of instruments are in there, and also with a monitor. So if you look at, and I have other examples of this, but I just want to show you the monitor. So if you look at these things here, you can see that the tape is clear. It basically is, I don't know, what do you call it, tan colored. But if you look at the tape here, you can see it has black lines on it. So these black lines don't show up until it's been through the sterilization process. So this is visually how I can tell whether a package is sterile or, well, how I can tell whether a package has been through the process or not. So here, I know that my package hasn't been through the process, but here, I know that it has. Cassettes can also be put into these paper plastic peel pouches, but they're kind of expensive to do it that way, so most do the wrapping. There is a type of sterilization in which we do not wrap our instruments, and this is called flash. Flash sterilizing means to sterilize an instrument without a wrap around it. So it's not in a bag, it's not in a blue wrap. The reason you would do this is only if you want to use that instrument on that patient right away. So let's say I ran out of mirrors, which is likely not to happen. But if I ran out of mirrors, I could flash sterilize one mirror and use it on my patient so that I could see that patient. So the pro to that is it's very fast, but the con is that as soon as I open my sterilizer, that instrument is really not sterile anymore. Because remember that diseases can travel in the air, so it is possible that a mirror that's been flashed could transmit disease. Now, we all can kind of take a deep breath here and say, yeah, but you breathe, right? So we don't sterilize the air we breathe. The big point would be that you never flash sterilize anything that's going to be used for surgery, because that cuts into the patient, which is different than just placing something in the mouth. So I bet that almost every one of us has put a pen into our mouths at some point in our lives, right? And pens are probably filthy. And yet here you are, you're still alive. So you want to have like a very real sense of what you're doing when you're doing this. Yes, a patient expects sterilized instruments, and yes, that's what we use on our patients. But occasionally, if I have to flash something because I don't have one that is sterile, it is absolutely acceptable to do it this way as long as we're not doing surgery. All right, so these monitors or these indicators that I was talking about that help us decide whether a package has been through the process or it hasn't are typically tape, but they can be strips or tabs. They're any little thing that changes color, and the process indicator is found on the outside of the package. So when a package is heated, it will change color to show that it's been heated. So if you look at these here, each one of these packages has a place that it will change color in response to heat. A process integrator is inside. So let me go back. An indicator is outside of the package. It's a piece of tape that changes color when it gets hot. An integrator is inside the package. And these respond not just to heat, but to time and pressure as well. So the one that's inside the package, where the instruments are, is much more sensitive than the one that's on the outside of the package. So you know that if your inside the package integrator has changed color, that all of those factors, time, temperature, and pressure, have been met. That's what that means. So if you look at this picture here, you'll see that the bottom one shows one that is not colored at all. That is the integrator before the process. After the process, it changes color to a darker color. So when I look at a package, I can tell immediately whether it's been through the process and whether time, temperature, and pressure have been met. So here's an enlargement of the common type that are used now in dental offices. They are inside and outside the package. So you can see that there's a dot here, which is on the outside, and a dot here, which is on the inside. So this barrier right here is the inside of the package. And that's what it looks like blown up. These have not changed color yet. So this is the base color. And it looks like that on your package. So these are monitors that I just went through. This is a great slide to kind of put that all together about whether it's an inside indicator or an outside indicator. So, or an integrator rather. And they are visual only. They don't tell us whether the instruments are sterile. They just tell us whether it's been through the process. Little mnemonic. Chemical monitors change color. All right, so they both start with C, and that's a good way to keep your terminology about this together. So just a word of kind of encouragement maybe. There's a lot in these chapters for infection control. Feel free to keep moving with the rest of the program and go back and spend time with these chapters when you have it, because there's a lot of important stuff in here. So here's a great comparison between unprocessed wrapped instruments and processed wrapped instruments. And you can see the difference in some of them may be labeled with the black pen, but what happens to the processed ones? We get those stripes. And those stripes are the alert that tells me that it's been processed. Because you never want to take one of these that hasn't been processed and use it on a patient. You always want to take one of these that has been processed to use it on a patient. So far, we've only got 3 steps down, right? So that's a lot. So the next 2 steps are probably the faster. So step 4 is sterilization. Sterilization is the absolute destruction of all microorganisms, and it uses heat. These are the most common types, typically. There are 3 types in dentistry. You will probably only see one of these on a routine basis, and that is the autoclave. That is a steam sterilizer. The other 2 are called chemical vapor, or unsaturated chemical vapor, or a chemiclave, different ways of saying it, and dry heat. So we're going to go through all of these quickly. So the autoclave, the most common. The chemical vapor uses chemicals. So an autoclave uses water to sterilize, heated water under pressure. A chemiclave, or chemical vapor, uses chemicals under pressure. And then there's dry heat, which you can think of as like an oven. This is a steam sterilizer. This is a very common one in many dental offices because it's very kind to the handpieces. So the drills that the dentists use, this is a great place to sterilize those. So immersion is the 4th way we can sterilize, which means to send it for a swim in a chemical. And we talked a little bit about these chemicals last time. These are not used very much in dental offices anymore. You need to know about them because you may see them, but typically because the chemicals are so caustic, they're so toxic and hazardous, we don't like to use them. So if you have something that will melt in a heated autoclave, you might have a vat of chemical to soak it in instead, and that's what cold sterile is. So the 2 most common, there's lots of pros and cons to each. I'm going to leave this to you to sort of put the ducks in line. It is much more important to me that you at least can name the 3 types and give me sort of an overview. So a steam sterilizer is the autoclave. It uses water under pressure. A chemiclave uses chemicals under pressure. Because we all live in New England, most of us, or even if I do have some students in Illinois who watch these, even if you live there, you're maybe near the lake. We all know that water rusts things. And so water, the autoclave, is associated with rust, whereas chemiclaves are not. So the chemicals that are used is to kind of keep the instruments from rusting. But the problem with the chemiclave is the chemicals are not good for us as humans, and they stink. So dental offices don't like to have them around because they give off an odor. These are the 2 most common types. And then we have the dry heat sterilizers, which work at a much higher temperature. They're not that great for most day-to-day dental instruments. I have seen these in orthodontic offices more often than in regular general dental offices. But there are 2 types of dry heat sterilizers, kind of like 2 types of ovens. So like a static air oven is your oven at home, and a convection oven is the forced air oven. All right. So once we go through the sterilization process, then we're going to store our sterilized instruments. And the big deal to that is just making sure that they're in a clean, dry place that's not going to have an event that could happen to cause them to be unsterile. So what kind of events cause instruments to be unsterile? If the package is broken, if the package gets wet, if, I think those are the 2 big ones, if it gets wet or if it gets broken. In that case, you would want to re-sterilize the instrument. So we consider instruments sterile indefinitely until some event happens to keep them not sterile. Delivery is step 6. Delivery is when we bring the packages to the operatory in a way that keeps them sterile. So if I'm bringing packages to my dental operatory, I need to make sure that they don't get wet on the way. I need to make sure that they are not broken open. And the best way to do this is to open your packages in front of your patient so that they feel comfortable with the fact that the instruments you're using on them are sterile as well. The last step is quality assurance and keeping good records. So at each point in our 7-step process, we should have a record of how we do it. So in the dental office, if everybody is doing it the same way, it keeps all of our patients much safer. And then when it comes to monitoring processes, I'm always looking at the gauges on my sterilizers, just like when you're driving, to make sure that the gauges are doing what they're supposed to do. So if one day you walk by the sterilizer and you see there's a flashing light on, just like in your car, you're going to pay attention to that light because it means something's not right. So watching the gauges with any machine that you use in the dental office is important. Chemical monitoring, biological monitoring are the last 2 parts. Now, chemical monitoring, we already talked about, that's the color changers, right? So those are the inside and outside monitors that have to be on each pack and change color when they are used. The biologic monitoring is the last part we need to talk about, and this is otherwise called spore testing. So what we do with biologic monitors is we place harmless spores into the machine with the instruments, and then we send these spores to a lab to see if they grow. If they don't grow, we know we killed them, which means that this works. I know that sounds crazy. They used to do this with potatoes back before we had spore testing. I know this sounds crazy, but in medical and dental offices, They used to put a potato into the autoclave, and if the potato was cooked at the end of the cycle, they considered the instrument sterile. Isn't that crazy? So see how far we've come. They used to have lunch with their sterile instruments. Now we send these off to a lab. So this is these spore testing strips, how we know the process sterilized. So up until this point, all I can say is that something went through the process. But if I have a spore test that comes out negative, which means nothing grew, then I can say that my instruments are sterile. We can run these by load, which most offices don't do, or we can run them once every week, which is what most offices do, to verify that the machine is working correctly. The only time that you will run a spore test with a specific load is if we're sterilizing an implant that's going to be placed into the patient's mouth. You know, that was a mouthful to say. So, spore testing, the only way to verify that sterilization has occurred. What is it? It's a harmless spore that's put into the sterilizer. What do we expect? That it will die. So when I send it to the lab, it better be dead. If it's alive, the lab is going to call me and they're going to say, you got a positive result, which means you failed, and you need to run the test again. So just kind of like a pregnancy test, you don't just go on one, you take another one, right? So if the second test comes back negative, then everything is fine with your sterilizer. But if you get another positive, you've got to take that machine out of service and get it looked at by a technician because it's not working correctly. Remember that any instrument that goes in there, we're using on a patient, and we don't want to transmit disease. So this is the way we do it. What spore do we use to do this? Bacillus staurothymopilus is the one spore that we used for steam. The way I remember this is because staurothymopilus starts with STEA, and so does steam, STEA. So you will probably only remember this particular word once for a quiz, and that's it. All right. So the steam and the steam, they both start with STEA. If I am using dry heat, I have to use a different type of, I have to use a different type of spore, and that is Bacillus atrophius. So if it doesn't look like STEA, it's not for steam. And when I say steam, it's either chemical steam or water steam. It's fine. The biggest reason sterilization fails is human error. And this is usually because we either pack the machine too tightly, we don't time it correctly, or we take them out before they're dry. So those are the big things. And need documentation of all this when we are doing this. So when you're processing instruments, don't skip steps. If you miss a step, got to go back to the start. That's that one-way thing. And remember that documentation of each part of the process is essential. So I know that sounds like a lot, and it probably took way more time than I wanted to go through that one chapter. But it is a big part of what you're going to do once you get into the office. But of course you need training on that. You can't just read a chapter and think you know what's going on, right? So you want to make sure that you have a real good idea of all of the things in that PowerPoint, so that when you get into the office and someone trains you how to do it, your little light goes on. It clicks as to why you're doing it. And now we're going to hop into Chapter 9. So for Chapter 9, we begin our talking about patient treatment. So Chapter 9 through 14 are kind of like the beginning of patient treatment. And a lot of this stuff is stuff that may be familiar if you've paid attention the last time you were in a dental office. Our objectives, key terms. And so the first thing is to remember the focus. So the focus is the patient, but we also have to balance the needs of the dental team with the needs of the patient. So when we are working, we want to think about the way that we're holding our body, And we call this ergonomics. So ergonomics is working smarter so that the environment is adapted to you. So if you are constantly reaching or stretching for something, whether it's at home or anywhere, the logical thing to do is to move it to a place where you can reach it better, right? And that's what we mean by ergonomics, is that we're going to work smarter to make sure that our environment doesn't take a toll on our body. The biggest sort of thing that you will see in dental team members is carpal tunnel syndrome. Carpal tunnel syndrome is due to repetitive wrist movements like extension and flexion. So what we do all the time is flex our wrist and extend our wrist. We do a lot of that all day long. So you have to make sure that every motion you're making is a necessary motion. Shoulder, neck, and back pain are also big in the dental office. And when I see this slide, I can still feel the spot where I always got pain while I was working. Chair side. Yes. Greeting and seating should be something that is somewhat familiar if you've been in a dental office. Using our last name, using the patient's usually first name. These days, last names are kind of frowned upon. But always use the proper. So if you're in an office where everyone calls them by Mr. or Mrs. and then uses the last name, make sure you do that. Some offices, they like just to call the first name in the waiting room. And this is all to protect patient privacy. So you are going to ask the patient to follow you. If they are visually impaired or mobility impaired, you may have to offer them an arm so that they can navigate their way to where you're going. And then you're going to place a patient napkin over them. Remember to be greeting and seating. What on earth is going on in that? Do you guys see that? Hang on one second.
Are there people dancing in the corner, or am I crazy?
Okay, so at least we're all seeing the same thing.
Yeah,
I
we
was
did
like,
it last
what
class.
is going on?
I wasn't gonna.
Oh, Lord.
I wasn't gonna say anything.
I know.
Do they know they're being recorded?
This is like insane.
This is kind of.
Yeah.
They did it all last class as well.
Yeah.
They did?
Yeah, I was gonna
Yeah.
say.
Oh my God! Sometimes I get so focused on what I'm doing.
No, but it's okay. No, but I can confirm that was the same thing.
Okay.
Wow.
Can you guys give me 1 second? I just want to. Yeah, I know. Like, I just want to make a quick call.
It's
It's crazy. Of course, do I have the number right?
They don't know.
I don't. Why would I have the number right with me? That would be.
And what's a little weird, I think, is that it's like the same movements.
Oh boy.
Good thing. Same thing.
Never a dull moment.
They don't
Where did
know.
everybody go? Okay, there's everybody. Kelsey, are you sleeping on me? It's okay. I understand I am not very exciting. All right, so the upshot of that is nobody knows what the heck's going on. But I think I think that there must be 2 TVs going at one of the sites, and I don't know how to tell you to ignore them because it's like so distracting.
But it's like, I mean, I focused on what you said last time, and I only looked up at them once.
All right, okay, so we can. I just don't want to take up any more class time trying to figure it out because we're already. All right, so let me just go back to where was I? All right. Okay. Good. All right. So big thing. Once you've got the patient seated, you're going to put the patient napkin on, which you may have thought of as a bib. Patient napkin is the correct term for it. Bib kind of seems like, oh, you child, you. Anyway, so tell the patient you're going to place it before you put it on, and make conversation. Ask if the patient has any questions. So upright position is 90 degrees. So the chair is straight up and down. You might put this back a little because straight up and down for most of us feels a little bit restrictive. But this is an entry and dismissal position. So 90 degrees is upright for entry and dismissal for radiographs and impressions. That's the only time you're going to have the chair straight up and down in that position. Supine position means that the head and the knees are even, which is basically the patient's almost lying down. That's treatment position for most dental treatment. The only other position we have is head lower than feet. And this is for an emergency. It's for a patient who's fainted. And what it does is it allows blood to rush to the head, which for many patients will revive them. So Trendelenburg, and we're going to talk a little bit about this later. So dentistry is based on a clock concept. And in this digital age, nobody tells time anymore, right? Or at least some people don't, by a clock. So this can be a little bit like, when you're trying to translate this. But the patient's face is at the middle of the clock. And then each segment around the patient is given numbers as if we were telling time. So from 12 to 2 is the static zone. Static zone is for the dental unit, the assistant's cart. Then the assistant sits, in the assistant zone. Why does that keep disappearing? There we go. Which is from 2 to 4. And this is all assuming we're working with a right-handed dentist. From 4 to 7 is the transfer zone. Transfer is always over the patient's chest. It is never over their face and never over their eyes. And then the dentist works from 7 to 12, which is called the operator zone. So these are the 4 zones of team dentistry. And you are typically seated as an assistant 4 to 6 inches higher than the dentist, so you're higher above so you can see. And your knees are right at the patient's chin, basically. So this is a very in your personal space kind of job, which I think we already grasped as we were, signing up for it and things. But you get used to that after a while. And it becomes a little bit less intimidating to be so close to someone. And then we call this 4-handed dentistry, which is your 2 hands and the doc's 2 hands. So you will see advertisements for jobs saying experience in 4-handed dentistry or knowledge of 4-handed dentistry, which is what this is, your 2 hands and the doc's 2 hands. So don't be intimidated by that. We did talk first class about 6-handed dentistry, which is when you have 2 assistants and 1 dentist. Ooh, sorry, I don't know what happened there. Okay, so dental equipment. There is a whole list of it in your chapter. There's a list of it here. learning to recognize what each piece is and reminding ourselves that it is expensive equipment, it's complex, it's delicate, and it is the clinical staff that take on the responsibility of maintaining it.
Quick question. Are you showing
Yeah.
a slide right now?
What's that?
Are you showing a slide right now? Because we
can
can't
you guys
see
not
it.
see it? All right.
Yeah.
Hang on. It, I knew that it did something. Is that better?
Yep. Thank you.
Hey. Yep, thanks for butting in. Love it. Love it, love it. Okay. So, clinical staff. We are responsible for this. So we begin to get familiar with what these things look like and what they're called. So the Alabama cart is typically the assistance cart. It's got drawers, it's got an opening top, it's on wheels, and you will use this likely chair side for most of your procedures. And then there's the rear delivery mobile cart, which basically means that it's going to be coming from behind the patient's head instead of in front of the patient's head. So we'll look at some of those other pieces of equipment at the end of the slides, but instrument transfer is what this chapter really gets into. So we want to be sure that we are getting the flow of what's going on. There's some great videos that you can watch that I have, I believe, attached. If I haven't, I will go back through and attach them. But the tray setup, left to right in order of use. So the two first things that my dentist is going to want are the mirror and explorer. So those should be the very first things on the left side of my tray because they are going to be used first. So that's what I mean when I say left to right in order of use. We transfer our instruments with the left hand. So the right hand is holding suction and gets the next instrument ready. This is reversed if you're working with a lefty. So with a lefty, you're transferring with your right hand. But most dentists are righties, just statistically. That doesn't mean that if you work with a left-handed dentist that that's not okay too. I've done both. It's easy either way. A minimum of motion, meaning fingers, wrist, and elbow. You do not want to be using your arm or your shoulder when you're transferring instruments because that's going to put extra stress on your body. The position of use is important, which means that the instrument should have the correct end facing the correct tooth. If the dentist has to reposition the instrument in their hands, it means that we're not doing our job right. So when I transfer an instrument, if I see the dentist changing the way that I handed it to him, then I know I need to change the way that I'm transferring that instrument. So pay attention to what the dentist is doing, and we change our actions accordingly. It's very much like dancing without your feet. So that, I suppose, is my little jab at the dancers in the corner there. So very much like dancing, but you're using your hands to dance instead. And then you should be placing it firmly in the dentist's hand. In my years of teaching, the one complaint that a dentist will make about a new assistant is that they are not firm enough with their instrument transfer. So the dentist should never have to take their eyes from the patient to see if the instrument is coming at them. They should feel it and be able to grab it and keep moving. So here is this in action and what you are doing. And you're doing that. So the same thing I just said in pictures. Some specific examples. The mirror and explorer are transferred two-handed simultaneously, meaning at the same time. So you are going to hold your hands on either side of the patient's face and you're going to pass the mirror and explorer at the same time to the dentist. And there is a video on this that goes from the textbook. Cotton pliers are used to transfer small items, and you want to pinch the beaks of those closed while you're transferring them. And then hinged instruments, you hold them at the hinge and you direct them either into the into the doctor's palm or over their fingers. So a scissor, the loops of the scissor go right over the doc's fingers. So here is that in pictures, and you can see the two-handed transfer of the Miron Explorer. Notice that the mirror is going to be in your right hand and the Explorer is going to be in your left hand when you're doing this two-handed transfer. Notice the loops of the scissor going over the duck's fingers so that the duck can use those. And then notice this other, that they're grabbing by the hinge when they're transferring. Notice too that they have the working end of the instrument in situations like this and this covered so that the patient doesn't see what that scary instrument might be, because we don't need their anxiety. It may not even be worth anxiety. It just looks scary. May not be scary. Dental materials are also transferred near the patient's chin. Things like cements and liners, which we're going to talk about in a future class. Materials that come in syringes are all passed so that the dentist can use them effectively. Amalgam is transferred in a carrier, and we will learn about that when we learn about our instruments. So there's some examples of what those things are. So here are the cements and the liners. Here's an example of a material in a syringe. And this is the amalgam carrier. Amalgam's the silver filling, just as a point of information. So this gives some tips for transferring. Remember that if it's in a syringe, we don't want our patient to see the tip of that, because it's not a needle. It's just a delivery system for that material. But if a patient sees it, especially if that patient is a child, they tend to freak out, and we don't need them freaking out over a delivery system. Okay. So the manner in which the dentist holds the instrument is called grasp. The grasp is determined by the type of instrument and where we're treating the patient. So the grasp can either be pen grasp, which is how they hold an Explorer, palm grasp, which is how they hold an extraction forceps, or palm thumb, which is for special instruments. So why do we care about grasps? Well, it's important to recognize how the dentist is going to hold something so that I can get it to their hand in the correct way. All right. Typically, this is where I make you take a quiz, but I'm not making you take an actual quiz. But we are going to go through this just so that we can hear the names of these different parts of the equipment and match them to what they look like. So we have the saliva ejector and the HVE. These are the evacuation lines. So my saliva ejector is going to go in this small one. My HVE is going to go in this larger one. And then we have the air water syringe. The air water syringe has two buttons, one for air, one for water. If you hold them together, you can get a spray. So this tip is always going to be changed. And this is the curing light. Curing light polymerizes, hardens, cures dental materials like composite and different cements. This is the amalgamator or the triturator. This shakes or mixes dental materials like cements and amalgam. We have the rheostat, which is the foot pedal that makes the handpiece go. And just as a point to notice, this little button means that either water is on or off. So if the switch is towards the blue side, it means that the water is on. So in this picture, the water is off. This is the dental unit, and you can see the hand pieces where they attach and the air water syringe. Most dental units these days have controls for the chair right on the unit instead of on the chair itself, so that the dentist can control it without having to reach under the patient's chair. And so when I step on this rheostat from the last one, silver disc on the floor, this is what I'm controlling, are these hand pieces here. So these work kind of like the fridge, you know, and I'm sure you've tried this when you were younger. You close the fridge door to see where the light will go off, and then you open it real fast again, see if you can trick the light. So these hand pieces work like the refrigerator. When they are up and out of the holster here, that's the only one that's working. So if you pick two up at the same time, then both will work at the same time. You need to have the button here pressed in to keep them from going off, basically. The dental light with the switch on the outside. So if you don't know how to turn it on, here's the switch. And then these handles should have barriers on them. The switch should have a barrier too. Okay. And then the three types of, or the two types of stools that we see. These are both dental assisting stools. And the only way you can tell a dental assisting stool from an operator stool is the ring on the floor. So the proper way to sit in the dental assisting stool is with your feet on the ring, and if it has a bar, your hands on the bar. Some come with bars and some don't. Some people like them, some don't. But so what's the difference between this chair and this chair? The ring. All right. So the dentist or the operator sits with their feet on the floor. Dental assistants sit with their feet on the ring. What position is this chair in? This is supine position. So the patient's knees and shoulders will be in the same level, and they're almost laying down, right? You can control the chair with foot pedals. Some offices have them. So the foot pedal can control how the chair goes up and down. So sometimes you're looking around for the buttons and they're actually on the floor. Okay, questions about chapter 9? No, everyone says we're sleeping, we're good. Okay, we're going to talk about moisture control now, which is basically suction. I am going to focus on the suction more than I'm going to focus on the dental dam. Dental dams typically require a good amount of practice in a mouth or on a typodont. Typodonts being the fake mouths that we use to practice on. So if your doc is one that wants you to place them, they will give you the opportunity to practice in the dental office on that. So our objectives again, and I say welcome to the deep dark swimming pool called the oral cavity. Basically, it's dark in there, it's wet in there, and our goal is to maintain patient comfort and also keep the field dry for the dentist. So this chapter is about how we do that. So the instruments for moisture control are the air water syringe, the suction tubing and connections, and the HBE, and there are a couple types of HBEs. The HBE that is most common is like this. It is beveled and vented. It might not be such a pretty color, but it is a long, usually not bent, and plastic. And so these are disposable. You throw them away after each use. Some use straws. These are not my favorite, but they do work well. Some docs really like them. And then we have a surgical HBE as well, which has a smaller tip to let you get into the tighter spaces where surgery might be being done. And then this one down here, saliva ejector. All right, so the saliva ejector is more like what you might think of as a straw. Okay. Two types of rinses that we do throughout dental treatment. The limited mouth rinse is performed frequently throughout the procedure. It is performed during a pause. It does not interrupt the dentist. It is basically a quick squirt with the air water syringe, and this is to keep the field clear. So I'm going to have my suction in place, and I'm holding my suction in my right hand. In my left hand, I'm holding the air water syringe. If you're not transferring instruments and you're more comfortable, you can switch hands for this, but typically suction in the right hand, air water syringe in the left. I'm going to hit the air and water together. So 2 buttons together and then the air alone. So what that does is it gives me a spray of water and then a spray of air, and that keeps the field clear for the dentist. So that's just in one spot. The other type of mouth rinse would be the complete mouth rinse. And this is usually done after anesthesia, at the end of a procedure, and maybe after an impression. And basically what you're doing is you are spraying the whole mouth from the upper right quadrant, the upper left quadrant, the lower right quadrant, the lower left quadrant, and you're going to have the patient turn towards you so that all of the water comes to one spot. You can use the HVE or the saliva ejector for this, and that's all personal preference. I'm an HVE girl, but other people might like the saliva ejector. So this is the freshening of the mouth. Saliva ejectors only remove liquid. They do not remove debris. So saliva ejectors are basically just for the removal of water from the patient's mouth, saliva. You bend them into a candy cane for best use, but they can still give the patient a hickey on the tissue, so you want to kind of move it around. A hickey meaning that it's going to irritate the tissue there. Patients like to hold these, which gives them a little sense of control over the procedure. I love giving these to my patient and showing them where to put it when they feel like they need it, because it's also a great cue for me to say, oh, they feel like they're drowning. The close-up of the HVE, these are for debris. So these are for pieces of filling material, pieces of tooth, whatever it might be that we need to remove from the patient's mouth. This is what you're going to use more often than the saliva ejector. And you always want to have the bevel of the suction parallel to the tooth. And that's kind of a little bit of a visual thing to look at. Okay. So you can either hold it with a thumb to nose grip, which means that you've got your thumb kind of stabilizing the back end of the suction, or you can hold it like a pen. Everybody is different in how they like to hold this. Okay, placing the HVE tip in the mouth. Well, you should place first before the dentist places. And you want to place your tip either buccal or lingual to where the dentist is. So if the dentist is on the buccal, then I'm going to be on the lingual. Buccal, remember, is cheek side, and lingual is tongue side. So basically, you're looking to be opposite where the dentist is, on the side of the tooth that's closest to you. So this takes some practice to sort of get what we're talking about here. But if you look at this top one, you can see that the dentist is on the buccal side of the tooth, so the assistant is on the lingual side of the tooth. Dentist on the buccal, assistant on the lingual. Dentist on the occlusal, assistant on the buccal, as close, because that's the side closest to them. Isolating teeth is the other thing that we do. So we suction to remove debris and water, but we're also going to use some things to keep things dry. So on this slide, we have cotton rolls, which are probably the most familiar and probably the most common. And we have something called a dry angle. And a dry angle is a great way to keep the cheek and the tongue away from the tooth. So this keeps it, this keeps it nice and dry in this area here. Dry angles typically are placed over Stenson's duct on the buccal of the second molar. So that's cheek side, on the second molar on this side. Stenson's duct is where one of the salivary glands, the parotid salivary gland, comes into the mouth. That's the Sour Patch Kid one. So, you know, when you eat something really sour, you can feel the saliva coming in, and that's on the top by your second molar. So we want to keep that dry there. Cotton rolls should always be wet before they are removed. So they tend to keep things nice and dry, and they're very comfortable for the patient. But if you don't wet them before you remove them, you might take a little piece of cheek with you. Not something your patient will be happy about. Last type of isolation is rubber dam isolation. Rubber dam isolation is a must for endodontics. So endodontics is root canal. And so we always isolate our teeth for endodontics. And the rubber dam is basically a piece of rubber that is stretched over the teeth. And it keeps the saliva on one side and the tooth on the other. How this works is by a clamp that goes around the tooth that holds that piece of latex or non-latex rubber on the tooth and isolates. You can isolate more than one tooth. The single tooth isolation is for endodontics. All right, so that's the most common place that you will see this. This is placed after anesthesia is given. So because all of the tissues disappear when you place a rubber dam, you want to make sure that the dentist is finished giving the anesthesia before you place your rubber dam. The anchor tooth is the tooth that holds the clamp, and the anchor tooth needs to be free of plaque and debris before we place it. So a tooth that has plaque on it is slippery, and so we want it to be nice and clean before we place our clamp over it. This is the technique that requires practice. You can place them, certainly, but I would want to practice quite a bit before I did it on a person. And if you're, like, a dentist loves that we want to place these. So if you were to be in an office and working and you notice that the doc uses rubber dams often, volunteer to learn to do it and have them teach you. They'll love doing that. Here are some dental dams in place so that you can see kind of what this looks like when you're working with a patient. And there are different types of them.
All right.
So remember, clamp on the anchor tooth, free of plaque, and then we're holding it down on another side most of the time. Single tooth for endodontics. The different instruments that go with the dental dam are what we're going to look at here, plus a couple others. This is the hole punch. So this is what puts the holes into the rubber on the dam. These are the clamps up close. Clamps have numbers on them. The numbers go for different areas of the mouth, and the dentist will usually ask you for a certain number. So all you have to do is look on the clamp to find the number. This is the clamp holder. So this is how we hold the clamp to stretch it over the tooth. These are the rubber dams. They come in packages, colors. You can punch your holes according to a template. So you can put your rubber dam over the template and mark it with a pen, and then punch your holes where you want them. They also make dental dam napkins that keep the patients, the corners of their mouth dry. That's a little comfort thing. And this is the frame that will hold the dam away from the patient's face. So there is the setup all together. This is the saliva ejector, nice and up close. And remember, you'll bend this into a candy cane. Here's my dry angle covering Stenson's duct. I'm at the maxillary second molar. This is the HVE, a couple different types. So the type in A, that would be the one that you would need to sterilize. in B, we throw it away after each patient. A dry field is more important than a timely instrument transfer. So if you are stuck between your suction in one place and rushing to get the next instrument, always remember that it's more important to keep the field dry. Worst come to worst, the doc can reach around you and grab the instrument. But if the tooth gets wet, you may have to start over. So keep the field dry. That's the big important part. Questions on moisture control? Okay. All right. So the exam of the dental patient is chapters 11 and 12. What we do to look at our patients. So if we start with 11, 11 goes through vital signs, and it also talks about the basic needs that people have for approval and respect. And really you want to remember that our job as being part of the healthcare community and the dental office is accepting patients as they come into us and making sure that you are focused on the patient. So if you're used to seeing a patient and they're always very bubbly and they come in and they don't look well, you want to make sure that you're noting that and communicating it to the dentist and saying, you know, Sally's here, she's in room 4, but she doesn't look like her usual self today. Because a lot of times that can be an indicator that something is going on with the patient's health. So we are important parts of the dental team for observing, understanding, and sort of being the place where the patient feels comfortable. They may feel much more comfortable with us than they do with the dentist themselves. Remember that the patient record is a legal document. Anything that you put into it can be used in the court of law. And this just goes through the things that we do at the front, who's going to pay the bill, name, address, phone, insurance information, medical history, dental history, allergies, things that we need to know. So why do they ask you in the dental office about your medical history? The reason is because many of the medications that we use or the procedures that we do have an effect on the rest of the body. So we don't forget that dentistry is part of the whole body, and we've got to know. Also remember, everything confidential. So if you see something on a patient record, maybe it might be somebody that you know. You are bound by your employment to keep it confidential. So, you know, finding out the patient has a disease, you can't tell anybody. You have to keep it to yourself. Clinical exam, what do we do? There are many different ways that we examine our patients. Visually with the mirror, palpation with our hands, with instruments like Mirror and Explorer, radiography using x-rays, an intraoral camera is one way that we can look, and also with photography. So the vital signs, you may not have ever had your blood pressure taken in a dental office, or you may have only had it if you were going to have a tooth out or something like that. Typically, most offices don't do this, but we should be taking blood pressure before each appointment. For young and healthy patients, it's often skipped. But it is important to have a decent idea of why we take it and also what the normal is. Pulse should also be taken, and that's an easy thing to do. You've got your 2-finger on the side of the wrist where the thumb is, and you are counting beats for 30 seconds, and then you multiply it by 2. Typically, we don't take temperature in the dental office unless there might be sedation involved. That's a possibility. And we don't often do the respiration either. So blood pressure is measured using a sphygmomanometer, which is the Velcro cuff with the bladder. and the stethoscope. Likely you've all had your blood pressure taken. You understand that there's something that goes around your arm. They inflate it, and then they read the gauges and give you a number. Many dental offices are using automated devices for this. So it's really easy. You're just putting your patient in the cuff, pressing a button, and voila, you get a reading. There are 2 readings for blood pressure. It is systole over diastole. Systole is the left ventricle pumping oxygenated blood to the body, and diastole is the heart at rest when it's filling with unoxygenated blood. We record this with the arm and heart level, and it is written as BP 120 over 80 or some number over some number. 120 over 80 is the normal. And I've got a cheat sheet. I think actually this is pretty, 12 is pretty, 11's pretty quick. And we're going to move on to chapter 12. So chapter 12 is charting. Charting is a very important part of what we do as dental assistants. Charting is the way that we record what we can see in the patient's mouth in pictures. Computers have made this super, super easy, but we have to be able to read it. And so the symbol that is used for reading or for recording the dentist's findings, the abbreviation that the dentist will use to communicate those findings, and the color that it's in are all what charting is about. So, that's blank. Okay. So our abbreviations are the first letter typically of the word, and they're combined to form descriptions. So if I'm on the mesial of a tooth, I'm going to say M. If I'm on the occlusal of the tooth, I'm going to say O. If I'm on the distal of a tooth, I'm going to say D. And so what I say when I'm trying to communicate mesial, occlusal, distal is MOD. So I might say number 2, MOD. And that's how I communicate the location of whatever it is I'm trying to describe. So these are the abbreviations, and they are combined to describe decay and restorations. So these abbreviations are combined to describe what we see in the patient's mouth. The textbook goes into cavity classes. I go into it a little bit deeper here, and I'm going to leave this as something that I would like you to come back to typically. But what this does is it describes where each cavity can be found. This is not information that you need to be able to chart in most instances. So you do need to know this, but it's something that happens over time as you learn where different cavities can be on a tooth. So we just want to review the fact that the buccal is towards the cheek, the lingual is towards the tongue, the occlusal is the biting surface, interproximal is in between, like here, in between, and then the midline is where we relate everything to. So interproximal decay on a posterior tooth looks like this, which means that there is a cavity in between the teeth on a back tooth. And you can see that here. Different cavity classes have different descriptions. I'm not going to read these to you. They are in the text. But I'm going to show you what they look like. All right, so cavity class 1 and 2. Class 1 is on the biting surface of the tooth. And class 2 is in between and including the biting surface. So if it's only on the biting surface, like these two are here, it's a class 1. So when the dentist says what this is, they're going to say this is occlusal. So they're going to say 19 and 18, let's say 18 and 19, O. All right, that's how they will talk to me. And from that, I want to eventually be able to say that they're talking about something on the biting surface here. And then if they're talking about something like this, they would say MOD because it's the mesial, occlusal, and distal of that tooth. So some different cavities here. Cavity classes 3, 4, and 5. 5 can be anywhere, but especially 3 and 4 are in the anterior. They're in front teeth. So cavity class 1 and 2, back teeth. Cavity class 3 and 4, front teeth. And so these are different, different cavities here. So like for this one, this is a front tooth, but the whole mesial side is missing of this tooth, along with the facial side, the incisal side, and the lingual side. So this is what affectionately is known as a MILF. So this is an MILF, a mesial, incisal, lingual, facial. Right? So charting symbols. Charting symbols are used to outline the area of that we're talking about, and then the color talks about what it is that we're doing. So let's take a look at these. So something solid is an amalgam. If it's red, oh, can you tell? Thank you. It's all right. Everybody knows when we see that we're almost there, right? Yeah. Hit it one more time. Okay. Thank you. All right. So a solid like this means amalgam. That means the patient has a silver filling there, or because this is red, it means they need a silver filling there. So things that are in red are things that need to be done, and things that are in blue are things that have already been done. Now, this whole slide right here only has red on it, so these are all things that the patient needs to have done. When you see cross-hatching, this means crown. When something is outlined, like it is down here, now it's really small to see, wish there was a bigger picture. The outline means that it is tooth colored. So solid amalgam, outline, tooth colored. What computers have done for us here is that as long as you can click on the correct thing, you're going to get this symbol. So here's where I get to do the old people thing. Back in my day, we had to draw these. So this is where I learned to be an artist, LOL. But this is all done for us by computer now. Very rarely do we have to make these symbols on a piece of paper. If you are, let's see, sorry. If you're trying to say that a tooth is missing, you put an X through it. If you say it needs to come out, you can also put a single line through it. If the tooth is impacted, which means that it hasn't come into the mouth yet, you can put a circle around it. So the point is that every dental person can read this for each symbol, what it means, without the description here. So your goal over time is to be able to read each symbol on here and know what it means. So when I have a single S on an occlusal surface, that's a sealant. When I have two S's, that's a stainless steel crown. And at this point, my hope is that you're like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? All right, so this is a tough chapter for this reason, because charting symbols are like learning the verbal part of the language in pictures. What? Right? So there's a lot to do here when you're coming to it. An implant is marked by these little horizontal lines. A root canal is a straight line through the root. So all different ways of saying what's in the patient's mouth. Here are some different charting programs and how they symbol this. So you'll get like whatever chart they use in the dental office, it may have a different computer program. And there are lots of ways to customize this. Lots of ways to customize this for the dental office. Down here on the corner is the paper chart. Isn't that fun? So I have some charting done here, and then a key so that you can read it as well. So you can come back in presentation, and it will tell you what each one of these symbols means. So there's also more symbols on the top here. So basically, it's a way of learning to speak the language. The book has also a great section on those things. So basically, when a patient comes into the dental office, we are seating them, we are looking into their mouth, we're going to make a treatment plan for that patient. Some patients may just need emergency care. They may only be there for the quick relief. And this is a problem-focused exam for comfort. So that's like a rental car. That's like, I just need it today and then I don't want it anymore. Standard care is your economy or your mid-sized sedan. This is bringing a patient back to normal function and gives a comprehensive view of what the patient needs. And then there's the luxury model. So I used to say that the economy or the mid-size was like getting the VW, and then the luxury is like getting the Jaguar. So the luxury model is what Hollywood does. So in Hollywood, you can get veneers on all your front teeth so that you look perfect on screen, right? So we understand that not everyone's born with Hollywood looks, and we also understand if you are watching TV that you can pay for those things, right? So you can pay to get Hollywood looks, and so that's what optimum care is. It's maximum function, it's maximum aesthetics, it's also maximum price. And so many patients do want this, and there are different ways for each patient to get to where they want to go. Recording the treatment is done in the record. The dentist will likely do this until they trust you, and then once they trust that you can record it yourself, you may be asked to put the entry in on what happened for that visit. So you can see how this is done. The tooth number is listed. Any materials or medications used are listed, and then exactly what the dentist did to the tooth is listed. Yeah, that's what I just said. Lots of the computer programs, this is an electronic dental record. The computer programs will even have templates for you to choose from, which make it much easier to put that together. So just a little thing about fees. It is possible that from the back to the front, you will be communicating what procedure was done so that they can be charged properly at the front desk. And so many practices use a super bill or a form that you will write down what you did on there. The dentist should be the first person involved in this process. So maybe you're writing it down, but the dentist should be telling you what to write down so that you maximize the amount of treatment for the patient. So lots to do when we're keeping records. Okay. Questions on 11 and 12. If you're overwhelmed, you're in a good spot. Sounds great, right? Okay. And so here is Yay, where I will finish on time with all of the chapters this week. So we are starting fresh next week, which is good. So chapters 13 and 14 are the last part of this. And what they do, chapter 13 goes over medical emergencies in the dental office. I have a cheat sheet at the end of both of these chapters that you can use for the exam. And the reason is that you are likely not going to be the point person for a medical emergency at first when you're in the dental office. And so you will likely be supportive in the way that you will be doing what you're told to do. As you get further into practicing as a dental assistant, you may find that you're interested and you may get more information about medical emergencies. That's chapter 13. And then chapter 14 is anesthetic. And your basic for that is just making sure you can prepare it. So we're going to look at both of these here. All right. So what is an emergency in the dental office? It is typically something that happens to the patient while they're in our care. It doesn't have to be triggered by what we're doing, but it can be. The best way to prevent this from happening is to make sure that you are having a conversation with your patient about their medical history before every visit, to making sure that there haven't been any changes and that the patient is feeling well that day. Biggest thing, of course, no time to consult the textbook. So if you're going to be a point person with this, you have to kind of really know your stuff to be part of this. But the big thing is that you are communicating what you see to the dentist. Even if it's not your decision to make about whether it's important or not, it is more your decision to make sure you're communicating. So there may be a point in your career where you feel more comfortable about making that decision. But right now, at the start of it, at entry-level dental assisting, you just want to make sure that if you don't think the patient's color looks good, you say so. Because it's better to say it before than after an emergency's happened, right? So better to be cautious than not on point. So standard of care is a legal term, and it's the fact that patients expect that they should be cared for in a dental office no matter whether they're in the one up the street or in your office. That's kind of what that means, is that we all do the same thing. Your office should get you trained in CPR. We used to offer it through the course. We don't anymore. You can go out and get this yourself if you choose to as well. So going to a local hospital and taking the course, they're usually around $100, is a great way to market yourself, but most offices will get you trained up in CPR. Signs and symptoms are what you observe. Signs are what you observe. Symptoms are what the patient says. So if the patient says, oh, wow, I feel dizzy, your responsibility is obviously to tell the dentist, patient's feeling dizzy, because they may not be in the room at that point. The signs are maybe the patient's not saying anything, but they are pale or they're sweating. Oxygen's the most commonly used drug in an emergency. And then there usually is a kit in every office that has the rest of these things. It has an inhaler. It has smelling salts for reviving patients who have fainted. It has an EpiPen for allergy. It has Benadryl for allergy. It has nitroglycerin for chest pain. It has diazepam for anxiety and seizure. It has glucose for diabetes. And it has hydrocortisone for thyroid, cortical storm, allergy related typically, or so the emergency kit in the office, expiration dates need to be routinely checked, supplies need to be checked, check the oxygen tanks weekly. So these are things that will be delegated to you. So this is what the emergency kit looks like. Most of them are all labeled up. All you have to do is make sure that everything is current in there, and make sure that you're familiar with where things are. Because in an emergency, if the doctor wants you to hand him the smelling salts, you want to know which ones they are. So what's your responsibility? Recognize the signs and symptoms, communicate to the dentist, and do what you're asked to do during an emergency. So I go into this deeper. I don't usually go through it in class, but there are, and I'm just going to do the first one because it's the most common. So fainting. So when I was practicing, I had a patient in my chair, big guy, full of tattoos, who was really nervous, and we were taking out a bunch of his teeth. We were extracting like 5 or 6 teeth. So I gave him the anesthetic, which is the needle, and as soon as I sat him up, he slumps and goes into a faint. And so what we did is we immediately put the chair into head lower than heart, and the guy came right back just like that. So he fainted. which you wouldn't expect with a guy covered in tattoos. You would think, oh, they're used to the needle. Well, a lot of them, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. So the chair position, just letting the oxygen get back to the patient's head, was enough to revive them. And then we went on with the appointment. He was fine after that. But this is when I was a dentist, when I was practicing as a dentist. So it's the dentist's responsibility to make that treatment. Now, the dentist could say to me, put the chair all the way upside down. So they may direct me to do it, but it's their direction that I'm following there. So basically what's our job is to be alert and ready to follow directions. So if you go through these different situations, you will see the signs and symptoms, and then you will see what we do about it. Okay? So if I'm alone in an operatory as a dental assistant with a patient who suddenly slumps and goes into a faint, I'm going to put that chair so that the head is lower than the heart, and then I'm going to call for help. Because the dentist will, and I may not even be able to get the chair down. I may have to call for help first, which is okay, because that's what we're there for. So this goes through hyperventilation, asthma attack, seizures, diabetes, chest pain, stroke, allergic reaction. So all different types of scenarios. Good thing to go through just to kind of have an idea of what is done for each one. So the last chapter is pain and anxiety control that we're going to cover tonight. And this relates mostly to anesthetic, but I do touch a little bit on the pain and fear aspect and some other things that we do in the dental office. So fear is something that keeps most patients from treatment. And if you see my little cartoon on the bottom there, sure, I see my dentist regularly. I see him at the post office, at the grocery store. So the point being that a lot of patients stay away because they'd rather not see us. So the big thing is to never make a patient feel bad when they're expressing feelings. So even if they look, like even with that guy who fainted on me, I didn't say to him, oh, come on, you've had 1 million tattoos, what's wrong with you? That's not a good way to make a patient feel comfortable in the dental chair. So the way that you make them feel comfortable is to say, I understand what you're feeling, nobody likes this, but we're going to make this as comfortable as possible for you. And that's what we try and do when they're in the office. So what do we do on a routine basis? Typically, when a patient comes in for a procedure, once we know what we're doing, so I don't do this for patients that we're doing an exam on, but if I know the patient is there for a filling, the topical goes on first. Topical is temporary numbing. It is typically a gel, and with the top teeth, you're going to place it right above the tooth because those nerves go right into the tooth on each one. With the bottom teeth, you're going to place it towards the back of the mouth because the nerve only goes in one spot. And we're going to review that. That's from the anatomy. What comes after the topical is the local anesthetic, which patients will call the needle or the shot, which you should always practice saying injection, because that is less scary than shot. Why? I don't know. No, but our brain does make a distinction. So the patient might say, am I having Novocaine? This is what they mean. Novocaine is the old term for the anesthetic. We don't use typically Novocaine anymore. It's lidocaine or prilocaine, but patient will call it Novocaine. They may say, do I need to get numb for this? This is what we're talking about. So what this does is it is a local, one place near the nerve injection that prevents it from generating pulses. It's short acting, which means that it is going to wear off after a couple hours. And some of our anesthetics have vasoconstrictors in them, which slow the bleeding at that site, which is very helpful if we're taking out a tooth or cutting into tissue at all. So less bleeding makes it easier for the dentist to see. Injection types are either infiltration, which is your maxillary teeth, or right into the structure you want numb. Nerve block, which is mandibular teeth. And then we need to be able to put together the proper tools for both of these injections and then transfer the syringe. Not everyone's transferring syringes anymore because nobody wants to get stuck. But a clean syringe can be transferred. Dirty syringe, once it's been used, should not be transferred. No one should be passing that from one to another. So when I am doing a nerve block, I typically want a yellow needle, which is the longer one. When I'm doing an infiltration, I want a blue needle. The way that I help people to remember this is to say that the sky is blue, so that's for the maxillary or the upper teeth, and the sand is yellow, which is for the lower teeth because the sand is on the ground. So sky blue for the upper, sand yellow for the lower. So when I'm setting up my anesthetic needles for the dentist, if I know we're working on an upper tooth, I'm going to put out a blue capped needle. And this is where those injections are going to go. So infiltration, if you think about a nerve as a branch, just gets those end branches. And if I want this tooth numb, I'm going to go right above it. And that's for the upper. I can inject right into the periodontal ligament, which we remember is the structure that is around each tooth. It's like the trampoline that keeps the tooth from grinding against bone. Not a very comfortable injection for the patient. And then the block injection is the one that is done to block the whole nerve. And this is for the lower teeth because the nerve runs through a tunnel in the bone the whole way around the mouth. So I have to get that nerve before it goes into its tunnel, which is way back here. So if I'm working on lower teeth, I'm going to numb it before the tunnel, which is a block. Putting the anesthetic cartridge together. So I'm going to load the cartridge, which is right here, engage the harpoon into the plunger, and then thread the end of the needle through the diaphragm. And you may have to go over the slide a couple times to get what's going on there. But basically the needle goes in this side of the cartridge, and the plunger on the syringe goes in this side of the syringe. So you're always placing the cartridge down in with this side facing down first. So once you put the cartridge in, then you attach the needle to it. Some other ways of making the patient feel comfortable can be to prescribe something that is taken 30 to 60 minutes before the patient comes in. Might just be using headphones. Some offices have TVs going where patients can watch them while they're having their treatment done. If a patient is given something sedative before their appointment, they need someone to drive them, so we can't let them go. And usually most places say no Ubers either, because you don't want to be putting an impaired person into an Uber. So they need somebody to bring them. Analgesics may be pre or post-op, so I might be giving my patient a pain medication, either before or after treatment. Remember that the dental assistant never prescribes or gives drug advice. So even if you are familiar with the effects of Tylenol, don't tell your patient. Make sure it comes from the doctor's mouth, not yours. You can certainly communicate the doctor's words, but you don't want to make them up yourself. You want to get them from the doctor, even with something as simple as Tylenol. And this is because of legal things. And then we record any medications that are given to the patient in their chart. Nitrous oxide is something that is commonly used, especially with kids. It is laughing gas. This is nitrous oxide is in the blue tank. Oxygen is the green tank, gives patients a warm, floaty feeling. And it is not pain control. So they still get an injection when they're having nitrous oxide. What nitrous oxide does is make them relax for the injection. and also makes them forget that they have one. So it makes time pass really quickly in their minds, and it is a good way to keep things comfortable. The big thing is that you don't want to breathe in too much of this stuff. And so a scavenger system is needed to reduce the amount that's exhaled into the air, so that the dental team is not bringing it in. Nitrous oxide is associated with miscarriage. And so if you're of childbearing age and you're trying to get pregnant and you work around nitrous oxide, you have to be very careful. So that is the big thing on that. Always take caution when you are preparing and assisting in the administration of a drug. And so I have chapter 13 review, chapter 14 review here at the end of this presentation. Little crib sheets to keep you sort of on track. Because remember a lot, I mean, I would never, I'm always going to tell you to read, because the reading is how it gets into our head. But you may not have time to do the studying, especially as we stretch these chapters. And so it's important to me that you are present for the lectures and doing the reading, but remember that the grades, while they're important they should be important to you, it's more important to me that you're making the attempts, because you're learning something even when you're taking the tests. And that's the thing. So I want you to have a wonderful week 4, and I will see you next week for week 5. Remember that coming up in 2 weeks I think it's 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks from tonight, is Memorial Day. There's no class on Memorial Day, just so you remember that. Otherwise, have a fab night, everybody.